So welcome back for episode 4 of the Digital CFO, an insider's guide of where finance and technology meet. And today we're really going to talk about what the CEOs and the board need to know about technology, really in answering the question of perhaps why have not more businesses advanced further along this roadmap to where the future lies, which is that sort of full adoption of software as a service, and in its most simple form, using one vendor as much as possible to provide applications across the broad suite that any business needs, ERP, the human capital management, your HR applications, as well as your marketing and your customer experience and your customer relationship management software, all interconnected on that platform with sort of your ERP system being the backbone of that architecture. So I'll just throw it over to you, Simon. And what's your perspective on perhaps why do you think that you speak to a lot of businesses and you're kind of scratching your head going, why haven't these guys done anything yet, or why are they moving just so slowly?
Welcome, James. Welcome, everybody. Good to be here again. Good question. I think a lot of it is just to do with lack of direction. I mean, we know that the senior leadership teams within organizations are driven by the board decisions. And I read an interesting article the other day from Deloitte in the US and looking at the board makeup from sort of 2010 to 2016 over there, and the percentage of IT background in boards went from 10% in 2010 through to 16% in 2016. So clearly, and obviously that's going to be even larger, I'm sure, now. So I think even the boards themselves are realizing that they probably just don't know enough about technology, and there's not enough awareness, and bringing on expertise in the IT space, similar to what the likes of Walmart did probably a decade or so, or even a little bit longer ago, when they saw Amazon coming along and saw that as obviously a threat to their organization. They brought people, CIOs and individuals with IT background onto their boards to help give them direction, because they saw that as part of their competitive advantage going forward, and obviously can't afford to get left behind. So to answer your question, I think direction basically is one reason that we're not seeing more move, but that as I just said, from that Deloitte report, is changing. And I think that would be across the board, right, whether or not it's the US or Australia.
Yeah, so look, I agree with you. There's no doubt about that. Boards really need to understand technology. I think you really have to have that one expert on the board that really has a deeper understanding of tech. And part of the problem is, I think, if you look at over time as well, most CEOs haven't trodden an IT route to get to that position. And again, that's sort of changing. Of course, there are always exceptions, but broadly speaking, many CEOs probably don't have the in-depth knowledge of tech, or necessarily know the right questions to ask. There's definitely something that that they'll be pointing to somebody else, going, what is the right, what's the right direction here, and you're very susceptible to perhaps listening to third-party consultants. Often they've got a hidden agenda, and again, it's just being able to ask those searching questions that really help you as a CEO or as a board member, understand the risks and understand how what they're doing fits into that longer-term strategy. It's actually, and I heard quite an interesting example, which was how during Sarbanes-Oxley in the US, of course, they rolled that out in the early 2000s, and one of the recommendations there was that boards had to have financial expertise. There's no longer an excuse to say, oh, well, no, nobody on the board can read a balance sheet or understand technology, understand a P&L. Doesn't wash. You've got to have somebody on the board. It's a duty of care to the shareholders to have people that understand these important areas of running a business. And I think tech's exactly the same, although not yet mandated in legislature. It does it. It is a very sensible thing, in my opinion, that you have people with deep tech expertise sitting on the board of these important big companies to protect the shareholders. And I mean, obviously, in one area is cybersecurity. We're seeing this is every day you read the paper, there's been some cybersecurity attack that's actually really quite serious. the new legislation in Australia actually, I think, now mandates that you have to report a cybersecurity attack to the government, whereas I think a lot of these went unreported in the past because of people being embarrassed to report them, sweep it under the carpet, or even worse, pay the ransom and then just hope that the problem goes away.
And it rarely happens, does it?
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think, but I've definitely heard stories where that has happened, and then a few months later, it's like, oh, they've got another problem and they're asking for another ransom. Not a particularly clever way to deal with it.
No, and it's not just that specific attack either. It's then the flow-on effect from a customer experience perspective. I myself have unfortunately received a few emails recently from large corporations that I've had my personal details with, whether or not it's hotels or car hire organizations. And unfortunately, the email comes in to say, we had a breach and some of your data has been exposed. So that obviously doesn't create a great trust and customer experience relationship with me. So it can have quite far-reaching issues rather than just that one attack in the first place, obviously.
That's very true. I mean, as a consumer, you're right. You don't really want to give your date of birth and your name and your address to an organisation you don't really trust to look after that data properly. And in fact, there's very big names. I mean, I've had to change my email passwords with some of the biggest US providers who've had breaches themselves. It goes to show that even some of the best tech companies have come a cropper here. And it just shows you definitely need real expertise. Incredibly, there was a business, I was at a CFO roundtable about this time last year, an Australian business with businesses across Asia had been subject to a cyber attack, and they were, I felt a bit sorry for the CFO, and he was running the whole business without an ERP system and had been running it for 2 months. And can you imagine? I mean, that would just be, back to God knows what you're doing. We're back to the paperwork and moving things around manually, an incredibly difficult situation.
How would you have any idea what's going on? I mean,
well, it's just
yeah.
But again, in fact, I remember telling him, look, you guys, if you've moved to the cloud, moved to software as a service, pretty much you would have ticked the box in terms of that risk. You would have only had to worry about a couple of super user admin passwords and obviously the roles of security, setting that up correctly, but it vastly reduces the problems of cyber security that you need to worry about. But again, it was a pretty laggard business. They hadn't moved up. They're still on premise and still had a lot of problems there. I just thought, Simon, perhaps you could explain to non-tech people as well. Just talk about the modern platforms and technology that are in the cloud and software as a service, and just in non-tech terms for people listening, or for CFOs that want to explain it to perhaps the non-tech board members or a non-tech CEO, why it's important to try and get to that end state of perhaps fewer vendors, moving from 3,000 legacy systems to perhaps just 2 or 3, and just to reduce the complexity of that IT landscape.
Yeah, I think an analogy that I've used in the past is from sort of a building construction perspective, where you've got multiple towers, if you like, that individually look like silos, representing, say, sales and marketing, finance, supply chain, and human capital management. And it's critical that those pillars not only can communicate, talk to each other, but are built on a solid foundation. And you want a single core foundation that is designed from the very beginning to support those 4 pillars. Even if you decide to build one of those towers at a time, that single foundation or single vendor, if you like, in the analogy, it's important to make sure that your starting point is going to be there as a solid foundation all the way through to the end.
Yeah, I mean, one of the illustrations I like is to think of it, for instance, if you look at some of these platforms that have actually all been coded for the cloud, so that you can enjoy proper real software as a service, which is getting upgraded all the time. And it's all it's been written for the purpose. Single line of code, bottom up. And I like the illustration or the analogy which says it looks like using Lego to build those tower blocks. You're going to use the same Lego pieces. They're actually all going to fit together really nicely. You can build your HR tower block here, and then your finance tower block over here. And guess what? You're actually using the same pieces. So now when you want to build the bridge across those two buildings to make them stronger and link them up, you're not there scratching your head going, oh, okay, I need a different, I'm now using Meccano, or I'm now using some other building block that has nothing to do with that building. But guess what? You've got difficulties. And in a way, that's exactly what businesses that haven't yet moved to that single platform software as a service model are doing. They're actually building. They've got a Meccano kit here, they've got a Lego kit here, they've got a duplicate here, and guess what? They find it very, very difficult to get the different kits to talk to each other. Exactly. And then this is the best bit that I love of the analogy, is that after 5 years, guess what? You have to knock it all down again and re-implement re-implement the software, which is exactly where you are with a lot of these legacy solutions. If you want to update them, whereas with software as a service, of course, getting the updates every quarter or so, and getting the new pieces and the new flashy bits and pieces to add to your Lego set.
Exactly right, James. You'd never architect a building to knock it down every 5 years, would you? So why implement software in the same fashion? And back to your integration point, when you're building that pedestrian access from one system to the other, or from one tower to the other, you want to know, obviously, that the connection point, that integration point, is the same on the other side as it is on your side, so it seamlessly connects from one tower or one silo to another. So really breaking down those silos.
So I think if in terms of, if I had to explain it to my mother-in-law or my dad, less techie people, that's quite a good way of actually illustrating it. And another one actually is for people who use consumer tech but perhaps don't understand the business world of tech so well. And it's this idea that it is easier to operate your life if you've got one platform. Let's say you just use Apple for everything. You'll probably find that your life is a little bit easier to operate than when you've got a little bit of Google and you've got a little bit of Amazon. In fact, I have to say that I've got an iMac, but I do my work on a PC, and then I've got the Google Nest, and I've recently bought some Amazon security software, hardware, and actually sort of kind of annoys me, and I kind of beat myself up going, why did I do that? I should have just stuck to the master plan, stuck to the roadmap, and just gone with one of those vendors to build out my sort of my home IT world. But
I think the takeaway there, James, is for any individual in your situation or organization from an enterprise software perspective, is make sure that you've got that sort of end state in mind before you make that first step. So that you're partnering with a vendor or a technology supplier, whether or not it's in the consumer space or enterprise space, that's going to be able to take you all the way through to that end state, wherever it might be that you want to go.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Simon, for joining me again this week, and thank you all for listening. Next week, we're going to actually talk about the CFO and his relationship with the CHRO. We've got a series here where we're going to talk about that relationship with each of the C-suite. And so I really look forward to you all joining then. Thank you.